Okay, welcome to BCP Eastern Planning Committee for the 6th of July 2026. So if we start with housekeeping, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Please note this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point at the War Memorial in the gardens opposite the front of the building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum. Mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So item 1 is apologies.
So apologies have been received from Councillor Joe Clements, Councillor David Flagg, Councillor Gillian Martin, Councillor Michael Tarlin, also from Councillor Cameron Adams, who is due to substitute for Councillor Martin. And substitute members, item 2, Councillor Bernadette Nanovo is here for Councillor Tarling today.
Okay, thank you and welcome. So I'm Councillor Paul Hilliard, I'm the chair of the Planning Committee, and I'll ask members and officers to introduce themselves.
I'm Marion Le Pedvin, Councillor for Newtown and Heatherlands Ward, and I'm Vice Chair of Committee.
Councillor Felicity Rice, Councillor for Oakdale.
Patrick Canavan, Councillor for Buscombe West.
Councillor Bernadette Nanovo, East Southbourne and Truckton Ward.
Matt Gillett, Talbot Woods Ward.
Toby Slade, Muscliffe and Stratton Park.
Jocelyn Holbrook, Transport Development Management Team Leader.
Peter Walters, Senior Planning Officer and Case Officer.
Simon Gould, Development Management Manager.
And Jill Holyoke is Democratic Services. Okay, thank you. So item 4 is public issue. Item 3 is declarations of interest. So are there any declarations? Councillor Nanovo?
Yes, since I agreed to sub for Councillor Tarling, I had an email from BCP Communities Officer telling me that JP Morgan volunteers are going to get involved in helping paint a shelter on, or 2 shelters, on Southbourne Overcliff Drive. It's a project I've been taking the lead on, but there's no personal gain for myself, just the community of Southbourne.
Thank you for being transparent on that. If there's no other points, but if anything does come to mind, then just let us know. So number 4 is public issues. So after officer presentation, we will hear from any public speakers, followed by any ward councillors who wish to speak. And item 5 is schedule of planning applications. And today we're looking at JP Morgan Chase Bank, 1 Chaseside, Bournemouth. And Mr. Walters.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me a second, hopefully this will appear on the screen in a moment. Perfect. Good afternoon, members. The application before you today is for the development of a 5-storey office building and 2-storey decked parking structure on part of the existing surface car park and the associated infrastructure and hard and soft landscaping. In addition, the construction of a pedestrian link bridge to link the existing office building to the proposed. The application has been brought before you today after being called in by neighbouring ward councillors. I have a few updates for you. Hopefully you've seen the addendum sheet. My apologies, there are a few administrative errors which I've sought to correct. So Wessex Water have provided comments. They don't raise any objections, having gone through further discussions with the applicant's drainage team. Those comments are on the addendum sheet. Clarification regarding parking numbers. I mentioned this on the site visit about my maths error in the moment there. So just to be clear on the net parking provision as shown on the addendum sheet. There's an update to the heads of terms for the Section 106 agreement. There was a formatting error in condition 14 where we'd had an issue with another condition pulling through. Slight rewording of condition 21 and there should have been the condition requiring the provision of an updated travel plan. This was mentioned on site earlier, and also an additional informative note regarding Section 278 agreement. All of that's in the addendum sheet, so I won't go through it in great detail, but you have it before you. So, I mean, just quickly as a reminder, the application site is on the site of the former Wiltshire plot and part of the car park. Obviously, we've been to the site this morning, but I'm sure you're all familiar with the surrounding area in any respect. I'll skip through the location plan. I think we've made it clear it's part of the larger Chaseside campus. So just as a little reminder of what we saw this morning, photographs, this is where the main office building would be. We stood in this viewpoint coming down on the access footpath from the car park to where the office building would be. And this is looking back towards the existing office building. And that's just clarifying where the link would be. I talked a little bit this morning and we passed the car park where the temporary construction compound would be, which is welcomed because it means that the construction compound, as we discussed this morning, would be on an area of hard standing and therefore not interfering with any existing habitats or trees. And then the car park in relation to the building, and as we saw this morning, the area of the car park that's subject to the proposal is the area to the furthest to the northwest of the site. So it's this area which you can see in the dotted line. I've thrown in a few photos of wider views that I have taken. These were taken earlier in the year, but it kind of gives an indication of the level of screening. And I made reference to this when we were on site this morning. These photos are taken from Littledown Park, so this is public open space, and you can see I've shown where we're looking towards. You can see that in fact you get very few in the way of glimpses of the building at all. It's probably hard to make out on the photograph, but you get minor views of the building through there, but nothing significant. I've also taken a few photos from some wider views as well. As I discussed on site this morning, the site is pretty well contained. There's a lot of existing screening. The campus kind of works in its own setting, and so there are limited opportunities for wider views outside of the site. The ones that do exist and potentially have the greatest degree of impact are from Mount Pleasant Drive. Again, you may just be able to make out. Sorry, my mouse is playing up. Let me pull that out and go back to the touchpad. There we are. Hopefully, you should be able to see there the building, just the apex of the atrium that runs through the existing building is very much screened, but you can see it there. And then this is taken from Cooperdine Drive, so just beyond the Wessex Way. So there are residential properties behind me. Again, you may be able to make out, it's quite difficult from the photograph, but you'll be able to make out the apex of the existing building there. In terms of the car park, these are photos, I didn't take them, I must stress this was a Google image. This is on the Wessex Way. You can see that the car park actually presently can't be seen at all from the road. And this is from Countess Gardens, which is in the Littledown area, and is the closest residential point to the car park. Again, you can't see the car park, and it should be noted, if I bring your attention to the location plan down here, that we're looking from, so I'm having real problems with this mouse, I apologise, but you can see we're looking from here where the arrow is. Sorry, that skipped forward. Where the arrow is, and actually the area of the car park, as we saw this morning on site, is on the other end of the car park. So the visual impact on okay, so we talked about this morning about what was there previously. A few photographs from the installation as the building is ahead. temporary building that has received a number of views of planning permission. So you can see it was included, restored, recovered, with insets there, and then we discussed the link and we saw this morning existed came down to what was known as the Walsh building down there. So this was the office building, and the primary focus of the proposal is the of the chicken and cheese employees. The previous building was for purpose, which around the time period, obviously during COVID, everyone had to go to working remotely, and the main intent behind wanting to erect this office space is to allow employees to come back into the office full time. There is some additional capacity for more staff in the future. We discussed this morning. The proposal doesn't state that additional jobs would be created. So in planning balance terms, we're not saying that there's going to be additional employment as a result of this. However, there would be a small increase in capacity, which would give JPMC the opportunity in the future, should they so wish, to expand to a degree. And the additional deck of the car park, as we saw, would accommodate increased office capacity, as well as alterations to the other car parks to give a net increase of 118 spaces. So I won't spend too long on the site plan because we're quite familiar with it, but just to really point out what I mentioned this morning, particularly in regards to the building lines of the proposed office block. You can see on my cursor coming up that actually it follows the building line of the existing building known as the Dorset building. So it provides a continuation, although it's a departure in architectural design. The building follows the existing building lines and therefore should fit comfortably in that context. So moving on to some plans then, excuse me. So these are the elevations of the proposed office building. As we discussed this morning, the overall height will not exceed the atrium. So if we're looking across here, what you can see on the plan here is the height of the atrium. What we're looking at here, this bit that's set in, and it should be noted it's set back. I'll show you some visuals in a minute that will help show that more clearly. But that's the plant at the top of the building. That height does not exceed the existing. It is accepted that the bulk will be larger because the flat roof of the office building is higher than the flat roof of the existing. But in the context of what is, as I said, a very self-contained campus, officers don't consider that change would be a harmful change. You can also see the link here. As I mentioned this morning, it comes in almost at a mezzanine, providing access between the ground and first floor, and then it provides access into the first floor of the Dorset building. And this, I think, I'm sorry, I forget which member asked me this morning, but there was reference to an existing building which provided plant, and that's there, and that's remaining. Apologies, I forget who asked me that. The entrance would be on the on this side, on the north-east elevation. You can also see the ground floor is actually slightly inset again. I'll show you some visualizations in a bit that will kind of make that clearer, but it's inset, creating a colonnade. In terms of materials, we're looking largely at glazing with metal cladding. So these are the end elevations, the side elevations, I should say. So in terms of what we're looking at, this one actually wouldn't really be seen because it's the elevation. You get views of it if you're in the Dorset building, but the wider views you won't appreciate. This is the elevation that faces out. It's the northeast elevation, and that's the elevation that would be visible in some of those wider views with the photographs that I've shown you from Cooperdene Drive and also Mount Pleasant Drive. So a few floor plans just to give you an idea of what's been proposed. The excuse me, sorry. The ground floor of the building would primarily be space for a staff canteen restaurant area, as well as some additional meeting rooms and a new reception area. And then there's some plant back here and a few, no, sorry, that's the kitchen associated with the canteen and a few other ancillary bits and pieces. So that's the ground floor. You can see, by the way, sorry, this mouse is causing me no end of problems, but I'll stick with it. So you can see this is where the link comes in on that mezzanine point, and there's a lift for users there, or steps down into the ground floor. Going to the first floor, again, you can now see this is starting to be the pattern of the rest of the building in terms of the floor plans. You've got the link going down, then you have all of this blue is office space, open plan office space, and then like a central core effectively. So that will have a mixture of staff breakout rooms, kitchens, toilets, but also meeting rooms. And then this is the second floor, which you can see follows that same pattern. I'm not going to show you the third and fourth floor layouts because they're near enough identical, but you get the idea behind the building design. So moving to the roof plan, this is, as I mentioned, there's a plant area which is set in, that's this lighter grey. You've then got solar panels proposed on the rest of the roof. Bournemouth Airport were consulted, I should say, at this point. You'll notice that there's a requirement for glint and glare to be considered, and they have no objections. That's to the solar panels that would be on the roof of the office building, but also you'll remember I mentioned, we'll get to the plans in a minute, but the car park at the moment, the roof structure has solar panels on, and that would be replicated just at a higher level. So the airport have been involved in discussions and have no objections. So moving to those car park elevations, and jumping slightly ahead of myself here, but you'll see this morning I discussed, we stood effectively around about here. This is where the lift would be up to the first floor and also spare access. And then the vehicular ramp would be here. The structure is minimal. It's a functional clad structure. This is the ground level, so you've got the ramp coming in here, stair access there, and then lift and more stair access there. And then the upper deck and the ramp coming up. And then the roof level, as I said, the solar panels would be reinstalled, so that the gains from having the solar panels that are there at present would be reintroduced in addition to the ones that are being proposed on the office building. So moving on to some illustrative images, which will hopefully kind of help make clearer what I've tried to explain in the plans. You've got an overall view here. This would be the office building linking to the existing building here. And it may not be quite so clear, but you've got the increased decked car parking there. And so these are just a few illustrative views to give an idea of artist impression of how the building would look when complete. Again, you can see the link that's here. This is the southwest elevation, so the entrance is around the other side. This view is generated pretty much where we were standing at one point during the site visit, if you recall, on the way down to the site itself. So it gives you an idea, and you can see that the link will have access out onto a ramp coming down here, which will provide easier access to the existing car park, so users can access that as easily as they can at the moment. And this is, so I should say, this is looking towards, it's the view, it's the side view effectively. You have the plant building over there, which we saw that is retained, the car park that would be used temporarily for the construction compound, and you can see here, you can see the colonnades, the colonnade and the recessed ground floor. I've got a few more of these as well, just to show you. This is where the main entrance would be on the northeastern elevation, and this is a wide view. It is indicative, so that doesn't necessarily reflect all the landscaping that's there. Some of the landscaping will have been removed from the image, as it were, to be able to show the building in a wider context. That doesn't necessarily represent a view that would actually exist, because as we know, about here roughly, there's a significant amount of tree screening. So as I've titled it, it is illustrative imagery. Obviously the plans would, if minded to approve, the plans would form the planning permission. Moving forward then to a few images of the car park, just to help clarify what we're looking at. It is designed to be a very simple structure, as minimal as it can be, while providing the necessary structural and safety requirements. And you've got the ground floor and then an upper deck. And the applicant has provided some wider view images. You'll note that these roughly reflect the photographs that I showed you earlier. Again, illustrative, but gives an idea. So Cooperdine Drive is the closest residential point in which residents would likely be able to see the building. As you can see, it's undoubtedly the view's changing, but officers don't consider that to be harmful. It's still set back far enough. I mean, bear in mind that you have the Wessex Way and then the access road coming up from Cooperdine roundabout up to the Wessex Way, in between here and the JPMC campus. So obviously a change in that view, but not considered to be harmful. Likewise, from Mount Pleasant Drive, if you remember, you could just about make out the central atrium. Clearly, the new office block would be far more visible, but again, a change in view doesn't necessarily make it harmful, and officers are happy that the character of the area isn't harmfully impacted by these changes. Moving on to highways, also I have Holbrook with me today to assist on highways comments, so I'm not going to go too far into this, other than to say, in terms of ratios, just for understanding car park provision, at the moment there's a current ratio of 1 space per 36 square metres on site, or 1 per 28 square metres if the Littledown Centre is taken into account. If the application was granted planning permission, the proposed ratio on site would be 1 space per 50 square metres, and if you take into account the Littledown Centre, it would be 1 space per 39 square metres. Obviously, highways have raised concerns about the impact that that could have on the network, and I don't want to stray too far into that territory, and I'll leave it to Mrs. Holbrook. But just to kind of give you some stats as to what we'd be looking at. And finally, as I mentioned at the start, a couple of members, neighbouring ward councillors, called the application in. The primary concern that they raised was the overspill impact of car parking into their wards. So as we discussed a little bit on site, the Littledown residential area to the south and the east of the site is covered fairly comprehensively by a controlled parking zone, and so that prevents members of staff for JPMC parking there. You can see from this map, I focused on the northwest of the site, which is going into the wards that the councillors represent. The yellow areas represent controlled parking zones that are there for part of the time, so it might be no parking, typically I think between 9 and 10 and 3 and 4, I forget exactly the times, but at certain times of the day. The green represents parking restrictions that apply all the time, so double yellow lines, and they tend to be around the junctions for obvious reasons. As you can see, at the moment there are a number of roads that are not the subject of any kind of controlled parking zone, and my understanding, although obviously I'm sure they will speak for themselves, is that this is where there are concerns about the parking impact of the development. As part of the proposal, if members are minded to approve, part of the recommendation would require the applicant to carry out far more extensive surveys to establish the impact that their development is having on these areas, and in the circumstances where it's demonstrated that they would need to work with local highways authority to introduce new controlled parking zones in order to mitigate that impact. So just to conclude, the site sits in an allocated employment site. So from a policy point of view, the Bournemouth local plan certainly requires the site to be retained as employment and on the whole encourages employment development within this site. And officers consider there are public benefits of continuing investment in that area. As we mentioned, there is the potential for increased job opportunities in the future. I want to just make it clear again that that doesn't form part of this application. So when you're doing your planning balance, we just need to be mindful of that. In terms of the design, you'll notice that the urban design officer had some concerns about the design and felt that there could have been further improvements, but officers have considered this in the balance, and particularly considering the location, as I've said, in a very self-contained campus area. And so officers therefore considered that on the whole the design is acceptable when taken in the overall balance. There's no objection in terms of drainage, as I noted at the beginning. Wessex Water have actually now provided comments and don't object, and our lead local flood authority don't either. The tree officers not objected. We discussed trees quite a bit on site, and we've got safeguards to ensure that the trees, the veteran trees on that site, would be retained, which are important not just for an ecological point of view, but actually they contribute very much to screening that campus, which we want to retain. Biodiversity net gain, I mentioned a little bit this morning. Again, no objections. The details that have been provided are considered to be acceptable, subject to the usual conditions as we do with all applications when it comes to biodiversity net gain. There is the outstanding Highways Authority objection. Their comments do suggest improvements if you are minded to improve, which include the upgrade to the bus stop at Cooperdene, keep clear markings at the Cooperdene roundabout, improvements to internal bus stops to encourage the use of sustainable transport, and also the need to carry out the parking survey. So taking all of that into account, the officer's recommendation is that the application should be approved subject to the conditions set out in the report and the addendum sheet, and also the signing of a legal agreement to secure the highways upgrades and improvements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waters, for that report. So now we'll move to speakers, please.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of members of the public, we have no registered objectors. Speaking on behalf of the applicant, we have Laura Batstone.
Thank you. As Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name's Laura Batstone and I'm the Bournemouth site lead. As I sit before you today representing one of the world's largest financial institutions, I'm very conscious that my journey began just a few miles from here. When I left university, I returned to my rural community unsure about what the future would hold. I certainly never imagined that I would go on to build a 25-year career at JP Morgan, become a recognised expert in my field, running a global function, and ultimately be appointed a managing director and site lead. The opportunities that allowed me to develop professionally, gain confidence, and progress into leadership were not somewhere else. They were here in Bournemouth. That's why the investment matters so much to me personally. The development is not simply about a building, it's about creating opportunities for local people, attracting and retaining talented graduates and apprenticeships, supporting long-term careers and ensuring that future generations can build successful lives and careers in the community, just as I've been fortunate enough to do. JP Morgan Chase has been part of Bournemouth for 40 years. The Chaseside campus has grown into one of the town's most significant employers, supporting around 5,300 jobs. It plays a vital role not only in the local economy, but also across BCP and the wider Dorset region, providing long-term, high-quality careers for local people. The campus is a strategically significant location in JP Morgan Chase's global network, supporting operations across more than 100 markets. It helps position Bournemouth as a leading UK centre for financial services and technology, with benefits that extend well beyond the site itself through skills programmes and apprenticeships. The application before you represents the next phase of our commitment to Bournemouth. It proposes a new 5-storey purpose-built office building delivering modern workspace, alongside enhanced employee facilities and an additional 118 parking spaces. This development will replace a previously cleared part of the campus that once contained temporary low-quality buildings. Importantly, this is not about expansion in workforce numbers, but more about improving and consolidating existing operations. The new building will allow all Bournemouth-based JP Morgan Chase employees to work in the campus. In design terms, we've worked closely with the architectural team. The scheme in front of you today responds to the existing campus character while delivering a modern, high-quality building, providing best-in-class working environment for our employees. It will assist in both retaining and in recruiting the best talent into Bournemouth. I recognise that parking and highways have been key concerns. As you have heard from the planning officer, the additional 118 parking spaces are compliant with the council's adopted standards. We recognise the concerns raised around potential parking pressures on surrounding residential streets. We are committed to being a good neighbour and maintaining an open dialogue with local residents. If concerns do arise in the future, we would welcome the opportunity to hear them directly and work constructively with the local community and the council to identify appropriate solutions. We're proud of our existing travel plan, but recognise there is always scope to do more. A strengthened travel plan, working in collaboration with the council's travel plan team, will continue to reduce reliance on single occupancy car travel. This includes investments in cycling facilities, our existing extensive shuttle bus network and public transport infrastructure, as well as exploring a partnership with Beryl Bikes. Highway modelling demonstrates that the development would not result in a material impact on the local network, with only a limited number of additional trips executed during peak periods. To assist with the operational effectiveness of the Castle Lane East Junction, we are proposing to fund additional road markings to ensure better utilisation of existing vehicle lanes and prevent cars from blocking the junction. In conclusion, 25 years ago, this site gave me the opportunity that changed the course of my life. Today, the investment is about ensuring those opportunities continue for the next generation. I'm proud to see JP Morgan continuing to invest in Bournemouth, creating a workplace that reflects its long-term commitment to its employees, to the community, and to the town's future. I respectfully ask that you support your officer's recommendation and approve the application. Thank you.
Moving on to ward councillors. First up, Councillor Lawrence Williams.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for the opportunity to speak this morning. I represent the views of both myself and Councillor Dove, who is unable to be here today. I wholeheartedly support the application by JP Morgan. As you've heard, they really are very good neighbours. Any issues we've had in the 16 years I've been ward councillor for Littledown and Iford have been dealt with swiftly and efficiently and with a lot of care and trouble. They've done everything they can to include us in any plans that they've had in the past, and they also included us quite early on in the process for this. So I've had a good look at the site long before you did, I'm afraid, but that's the privilege of being ward councillor. So without prolonging the pain too much, the yellow lines we have in our ward work for us. We get the odd occasion where, and it happens on a weekly basis, somebody will park, think they're getting away with it, and find a ticket on their screen, certainly if they do it 2 days on the trot. So the yellow lines work between 11 and 12 and 2 and 3 in the afternoon. So the controlled zone is the way forward, and it's the way forward, I think, for the neighbouring ward, but you'll hear from them. So again, I would thank you for hearing and encourage you to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Alistair Keddy.
Good afternoon, Chair, members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this application today. I'm Councillor Alistair Keddy, Ward Councillor for Queen's Park, and I called this application in on behalf of my residents, many of whose homes are within walking distance of the JP Morgan site. These residents already experience some loss of amenity to employees parking on residential streets, and they are very concerned about further overspill if this application is granted. JP Morgan, as noted in the MD's representation, is Bournemouth's largest private sector employer, and residents value the investment, the jobs and the long-term commitment that this scheme represents. My representation is not against the development, but about making sure overspill parking impacts do not land on residential streets and that adequate mitigation is put in place to balance the needs of the communities nearby. The proposed office block development represents a significant intensification of the campus, accommodating approximately 1,600 employees, with the stated purpose of the development being to bring existing employees who are working at home back on site 5 days a week. However, JP Morgan's economic and social value statement says the development will provide some capacity for additional employees should JP Morgan Chase wish to expand the on-site workforce in the future. So while the application largely rests on no increase in staff, the scheme is explicitly credited with headroom for future growth. If attendance rose to 5 days a week for the existing workforce and the workforce later expands, the pressure on parking and particularly overspill into residential areas is likely to be greater than the current surveys suggest. The current survey suggested was based upon 84 to 89% occupancy, with hybrid working still being in place. Regarding the parking survey methodology, highways and local residents raised issues about the applicant's parking surveys, in that they examined roads that already had robust restrictions, not the unrestricted streets, like Parkway Drive, where current overspill already exists. Surveys were taken in the school holidays when attendance was reduced and may not have given a fair representation of the day-to-day impact. And there was no street-specific assessment of unrestricted streets. The application offers little protection to my residents. There is only a commitment to conduct a study into expansion of the existing CPZ, with TRO fees paid only if the study confirms need. There is currently no timescale for the study to take place, no definition of the survey methodology, which I feel is doubly important as the last survey was flawed, and no definition of what kind of scheme may follow. With a timed waiting scheme as exists in the Littledown area, residents lose daytime parking for themselves and their visitors. If a permit scheme comes forward, residents can be expected to pay hundreds of pounds per year. Either way, residents bear the cost of solving a problem that they did not create. If the committee is minded to approve, I would ask you to consider the following conditions. Firstly, to set a defined timescale for the controlled parking zone study, preferably completed within 6 months of occupation of the site. Second, ensure the study includes the unrestricted roads within a 15-minute walk of the site as they are currently utilised. Ensure surveys are conducted in term time on core office days to give a fair and adequate representation of the use. The applicants fund implementation of whatever scheme the study recommends, including any resident permit costs for initial period or any TRO costs. It's unfair for the cost of this scheme to fall on residents. Most importantly, please ensure residents and ward councillors are consulted as far as possible as the travel plan develops. I welcome the MD's commitment to be a good neighbour and to have open lines of communication with residents and the council. I also note the recent application for the AFC Bournemouth Stadium, where a travel working group was set up to include ward councillors and the applicant's travel officers. Could a similar scheme be considered here, given the scale of the development and its impact on our communities? To close, myself and my residents welcome JP Morgan as an employer in the area. We simply ask that travel and parking mitigation is open, fair, and adequately balances the needs of our residents against the economic benefits of the development. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee.
Thank you. And Councillor Sharon Carr-Brown.
Thank you very much, Chair and Committee. And at the risk of being slightly repetitive, I have some similar concerns. So I support development of this site as vital employment, but I wish to make the case for the residents that I represent in Queen's Park regarding their legitimate parking concerns. I'm particularly referring to roads such as Feversham Avenue, High Trees Avenue, Parkway Drive and adjacent roads, which are only a 5 to 10 minute walk from JP Morgan Chase and are already used as all-day parking by employees. As parking restrictions, as noted in the maps, are often only on one side of the road, if there at all. And I refer the committee to policies CS 13, 14, 15, 16, 18 and our SPD, parking SPD. The technical note that JP Morgan Chase added does address this overspill area and states that there's very little effect on these roads through daytime parking. But I know what residents have told me and reported in their objection letters, and this needs to be heard. It seems that because it's considered that sufficient parking spaces have been provided in law, we can ignore whether people actually use them or park elsewhere. The reality is that if you don't mind a bit of a walk, many park away from the campus and avoid the traffic horrors of trying to leave work at 5:30 via Castle Lane. This is where the policy and the application fail the reality test. Therefore, I'd argue that my residents and others nearby still require the protection of some parking measures to stop their roads becoming the go-to alternative car park. This principle has been accepted for so many roads in the Littledown area that I can't see why the same wouldn't apply to Queen's Park. The walking times are similar, and we have adequate testimony that it's already a problem, so it will only get worse. The table on page 6 of the technical note makes it clear that this scheme will reduce the number of available parking spaces per employee from 0.3 to 0.23. Provision is made within Section 106 money for TROs and possible CPZs. I'd like to see a consultation carried out with the residents I've mentioned to see what they'd like. Some have suggested a single yellow line with time restrictions, which would mirror what already happens in some nearby roads. But this needs to be part of the conditions if this is granted today and carried out as soon as possible. More widely, I still have concerns about the slip road onto the Wessex Way from Queen's Park Avenue, which is heavily congested in the morning. I agree we can't know where all those cars are going, but for this and other traffic flow issues that have been raised, the addition of these extra car journeys cannot help. Page 33 of the travel statement refers to an additional 258 car trips by single occupants. With 118 extra parking spaces being provided, that makes 140 cars parking somewhere else. Page 29 has 10% of the increased workforce unaccounted for in the mode shift calculation, which is perplexing, and an increase from the 3% it was previously. How will that 10% get to work? I think there are still too many unanswered questions around the transport and parking aspects of this application. I'm not aware that any of us have seen JP Morgan's current green transport plan, and we only have some of the data they've chosen to share. We're told in the transport statement at para 2.3.8 that it addresses the vision and objectives of BCP's local transport plan 4 without telling us how. The accompanying transport plan includes no new measures, and the technical note demonstrates that JPMC have already moved some distance towards us. I'd like them to move a little further. It's disappointing, for example, that the car park only includes 2 new EV charging points. I would ask the committee to increase that number significantly to reflect the growth in buying of electric vehicles. Beyond my ward, my greatest concern is for traffic exiting the JP Morgan site onto Castle Lane in the evenings. We all know the current situation is unacceptable, and yet the transport plan approach seems to be it's already terrible, so it won't matter if it's a little bit worse, whilst offering no solutions to the level of modal shift that is required here. There are many measures the bank could have outlined, such as solid proposals for moving more employees onto the often empty private bus service, which incidentally costs an average employee more for a monthly ticket than they charge their senior managers for a monthly parking permit. I'm pleased that over the past few months, JP Morgan have taken on board some of the comments by residents and councillors, but I think more concrete measures and commitment are still needed to reassure my residents that this expansion will not simply result in more traffic and parking misery for them. I urge the committee to please, if you're minded to grant, ensure that protections such as additional parking enforcement capacity and a consultation on single yellow lines in the area I've suggested are part of it. The costs of any agreed measures must be covered by JPMC alone and not my residents. I just want JP Morgan to be good neighbours to us too. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for all the speakers. I think it'd be appropriate if Mrs. Holbrook, if you could come in at this opportunity. We've got the picture about the existing TROs north of the Wessex Way, so it'd just be if you could give a brief your interpretation of the framework travel plan which JPMC have produced, and how you're working with them as possible solutions, and also how you see the TRO system working. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so on screen is the areas where there's existing traffic regulation orders, which has been discussed this morning. Is a yellow line that prohibits parking like 10 to 11, so you won't be able to park all day. So it's suggested in a condition that the area is looked at an expansion because it's been operating very well as the parking survey had shown, which had gone in this area, had shown that it's working. So it is about expanding into the other areas. Now, this needs to be agreed really with the council of the areas to include, as mentioned by the ward councillors, that residents have highlighted certain roads in particular. So we really need to leave this to a condition where we can have the evidence, put a methodology together, and whether it needs to be expanded. Now, this is separate to the planning permission. So traffic regulation order is a separate process. However, the condition can be agreed, and most importantly, the funding towards that traffic regulation order, and the applicant covering that signing and lining in particular within the section 106. And just to kind of reiterate some of the points about number of parking spaces touched on as well in the deputation. So in the parking standards SPD, the sites in zone C, we look at one space per 50 square metres of office space. So it doesn't matter how many employees you have, it's to do with the square meterage of the offices. And so where the issue is with this application is the off-site parking. So it's the 257 parking spaces which are leased at the Littledown Centre. Now, if we were just looking at the building today, there wouldn't be the objection. It's the additional car parking plus the off-site, which gives 1 per 39 square metres, and that's the issue. Now, the applicant and council opinion is that we shouldn't be looking at off-site capacity as well. However, the Highway Authority have taken a logical view that yes, we're looking at all of the car parking. But I think what's really key here is that we have the travel plan working with the applicant. We mentioned about the private bus network, and in the transport assessment showed there's about 300 spare spaces on the capacity of that existing network. So there's a lot of work that can be done with the applicant in improving those journeys. We've got improvements here with cycle parking and showers and locker facilities to help with that modal shift. The difficulty will be getting everything ready straight away, because it's that culture change as well, and having all the showers and everything facilitated. But I do agree with the ward councillor about putting in a timescale with the TRO review. Perhaps we need 2, so that we can actually see how it's working. But we have got the condition there, so we have been thinking about this TRO expansion, but it does need more visits and more data to demonstrate those areas that do need to be increased. So
Okay,
sorry.
thank you. I'm sure we'll call on you first. So if we can have questions then, please. Councillor Slade.
Might be one for the applicant, not officers. So we've got approximately 1,600 new bums on seats with this new site. So what was the number of the old Hampshire site pre-COVID? And is there a net gain or net loss? And does the applicant have any data on how far employees are travelling in? Are they living within half a mile? Are they living within 5 miles? Are they driving? Yeah, be handy to know if they've got it, if you guys haven't got it, if we can get it, please.
Mr. Waters.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of discussion on site about this. With your permission, if we're happy to.
Other committees happy if someone from JP Morgan and Chase comes to the desk? Okay, if you have that. I do want to answer that question again, Councillor Slade.
So this new site's got 1,600 bums on seats. Is there a net gain or net loss from what was the old Hampshire? It was the old Hampshire site, right? Wiltshire, sorry. So what was the old site in comparison to the 1,600 new there now? And do we know roughly how far people are driving in?
So there was less capacity on the Wiltshire site. I haven't got the exact numbers. It is set out in the planning statement and transport statement. But over time, because obviously that was demolished post-COVID in 2021. In that time, JP Morgan Chase have employed additional employees, but obviously with them working from home and various things. So this is about, it's not about employing any more employees they've already got on their books. It's just about bringing them all on site. I think you also asked the question about distance travel. There are surveys done of employees, so travel plan surveys of where people are travelling from and how people are travelling. There is part of the transport statement, there was some plan modelling showing where people were travelling from, but as part of the travel plan work, that's the work to be done with the council as well to take it further forward, is to they've done new surveys this year to keep constantly doing surveys to find out exactly where people are living, where they're travelling, why they're travelling, so they can really tailor the shuttle bus service as well. So as part of this whole book was saying about the shuttle bus service, looking at that to make sure the routes are optimising from where people live.
Okay, thank you. If you take a seat. Any other questions, Councillor Canavan?
I wonder if you could respond to the question that Councillor Kelly raised about a transport working group, which is what we did on the back of the AFC Bournemouth. I mean, I've looked at that foundation framework travel plan, and it just strikes me that there's still quite a lot of work to do on that. I don't think it's by any means a finished piece of work. So I'm looking at the degree to which anybody, councillors, residents, or anybody, can have some influence over the development of that travel.
Ms. Holbrook or Mr. Waters, whichever.
Thank you, Chair. There's no increase in staff proposed. I think if it's something the applicant was willing to do, then it's something we could do, but I'm not sure as we could insist on it. Obviously the AFC Bournemouth application was increasing the capacity, so there was a clear change here. JPMC aren't increasing the number of staff, so I'm not sure it's something. Excuse me, I'm not sure it's something we can necessarily insist on.
it's not a question of whether they're increasing their staff or not. What's clear is that they're going to increase the number of car journeys. That's absolutely clear in this. The number of travel journeys is going to increase. So that means to me that there'll be more cars on the road. So and the probability of overspill parking elsewhere. So I'm asking again, given that, why we can't have some form of transport working group to involve residents and or councillors.
So what was the initial thought? Is that within the highways team, you're obviously working with JP Morgan. So is there an avenue to expand that?
So we do have the condition for the travel plan and the travel plan monitoring fee. So within the travel plan, we'll be discussing modes of travel, including private vehicles. So officers will be working with the applicant through those avenues, but just discussing with the case officer is whether there's proportionality because there's no increase in staff, whether would it meet the tests to allow that condition. However, if the applicant agrees, there's no objection. It's whether we can legitimately add that condition in with the proportionality tests for that condition. However, we will be monitoring under the travel plan anyway. It's just, I appreciate it won't involve local residents through the travel plan monitoring work.
Sorry, I don't wish to be rude, but isn't it our decision about whether we can impose that extra condition?
Well, I think, as the officer said, it's reasonable to put that condition. And if yes, appreciate there are going to be more car journeys, more parking, but as we've heard, the application before us is for an office block which isn't creating more actual workers, and that's for reasonable. What we've got to justify when we do conditions. So is it reasonable?
But we know there are going to be more cars on the road, Chair. So why can't, on the basis of that, why can't we condition some form of consultation about the travel plan?
Okay, we've come under that when we have a discussion. But are there, Councillor Rice?
Yeah, can you clarify about the requirement for cycle parking and whether there's any minimum requirement? We've covered sort of where they are with the car parking, but I was wondering how they're doing with cycle provision.
So sorry, I was just trying to find my notes. My page wouldn't open. Yes, so there is an increase in cycle provision. So what the applicant's done is they haven't just looked at the proposed building, but actually looked at the whole campus, which is mentioned on site visit this morning. That includes the increase in shower provision and locker provision, and the cycle provision, which will be internal in the building and include Sheffield stands, which is important because, as we saw this morning, a lot of them were the double stack, and whilst we're wanting to increase the number of staff, and JPMG themselves want to increase the number of staff cycling to the office, there are obviously barriers at the moment stopping. So the improvements and increase in the number. Sorry, I'm looking through my figures at the moment, trying to find the.
I've got their plans.
You've got it.
It's the plans that you.
So it's 614. That's the figure I was looking for. Is what is to be on site.
And what I was wondering is there a specific number that they have to meet in order to meet the supplementary planning document, parking document, the SPD?
Yes, there is. Again, I'm looking for that figure, but what they proposed is actually more than what we would ask for. So we were happy with the cycle provision. That wasn't one of the areas of concerns.
Okay, and so I don't know, Mr. Waters, but obviously we're talking about additional conditions, and you said in the addendum additional wording that was relating to the traffic plan, and as we heard from the ward councillors, we could add in potentially a 6-month delivery date. Is that reasonable? And also, obviously, whilst maybe not formally, councillors and public, we may not be able to say that in the condition, but as we've heard from Councillor Williams, there is obviously some flow of information from ward councillors with the company, so we can mention it in a condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I don't see any issue with saying that it has to be within 6 months of first occupation. I think would be a reasonable trigger.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
when we've got everybody fully back to the office.
Yeah.
For a full, clear assessment.
Yeah. So we certainly could add a trigger into the condition if members felt that would be appropriate, in terms of having some surety as to when that's actually going to take place. In terms of if we start adding into the condition that you have to consult so and so, then to discharge that condition, they would then have to do that, which starts to then stray into, if we're doing that, we've got to go back to the MPPF tests, make sure that they're compliant with the MPPF tests, or else we're open to that condition being challenged at appeal for being unreasonable or not necessary, and so on and so forth. So I think certainly the 6 months is absolutely reasonable, and it's precise and enforceable and necessary. Not 100% sure about adding in the need to consult specific people at this point.
Right, thank you for that. And just expanding on that, so again, the councillor mentioned a 15-minute walk radius, and to ensure that the study is taken within term time, weekday, and is that reasonable?
Thank you, Chair. I would suggest that we would obviously they'd have to submit the condition, submit to discharge the condition, and they would have to meet our requirements. Whether we could get as specific as that.
Because it does make sense, as the councillor says, that we want to see the data when the office is fully operational. Worst case scenario, basically.
Yeah. Mr. Gore, did you want to comment on whether that would be?
I can come in as well, just to say that with parking surveys, they have to be done, not during school holidays anyway. So we already have our criteria, and we would welcome liaison with the applicant about those parameters when the survey will be carried out.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rice.
In the planning sort of summary, it stated that the economic benefits of this development were influential in sort of the balance. And I just want clarification that actually we could resolve the transportation and highways issues by having less car parking, and still get the economic benefits. There was a suggestion in the planning document that you could only get the economic benefits by allowing the car parking, but actually obviously we can have huge numbers of people travelling around if public transport and active travel were properly integrated into our day-to-day sort of infrastructure. So there was an assumption there that you couldn't have the economic benefits of this development unless we allowed the car parking. So I just wanted clarification that that isn't correct.
Yeah, thank you. No, the car parking isn't required to gain the economic benefits, but there is a balance where if it's compliant with the SPD, then we can't reasonably not allow it So I mean, you know, if the office space is increased and there's no additional car parking, then the benefits of that do exist. But when we have a parking SPD that says that they can have a certain amount of car parking, we can't really say, well, you can't meet that. I mean, the other point I would make is I think for us a big benefit that would come out of this, if members are minded to approve, is to have sight and oversight of the travel plan. And the main purpose of the travel plan is to encourage employees to use sustainable methods of transport where they can. And obviously, if we have more oversight of that and control, that means that we can work with them to ensure that that happens where possible. So the strict answer to your question is no, but I think there's a little more to it, if I may suggest.
Are you happy with the moment?
I thought that they were over providing on the SPD because we were taking into account the Little Down parking.
So there's some discussion here between the planning officers and the local highways authority as to whether off-site parking should be considered, and I think that's something that members are going to have to consider. The officer's position, which is in the report, is that we can't take off-site parking into account, but the local highways authority disagree, which forms part of their objection. So members would have to consider what they consider to be appropriate. But yes, so if you take the off-site parking into account, there is absolutely an over provision. There's no question of that. And so there is then the question of, well, in that case, why do they need so much more parking? If you don't take that into account, then they're providing policy compliant parking on site. And so in that instance, as I said before, it would seem unreasonable to say, well, you're not, you know, you're providing policy compliant parking, and it would be unreasonable to say that that's unacceptable, if that makes sense.
And one of the other things that you mentioned just then was about the fact that the benefit of having a travel plan, if we grant this planning permission, but I assume we could also work with them to have a travel plan if we had a planning application coming forwards that had that didn't have this additional car parking. We could still work with them to create a travel plan.
That's if an application comes forward. Yeah. But at the moment, there is no other current planning applications, only this one, and therefore the travel plan is to be secured by condition.
Okay. Councillor Canavan.
Well, it wasn't my question really, but just in response to that point, there is another planning application because I've seen it on the system in relation to this site.
Apologies, there's a bit of background noise. Would you mind?
It says under consideration.
Just repeat it.
Sorry, I can't hear without noise.
And what was that other application for?
There's another app on the BCP planning app. When I searched for this application on today to find this, because I was looking for that travel plan thing, there is another application on there which says under consideration as well as this one.
Okay, we officers will just have a quick look, but the applicant and the company are saying there is no other one.
We're just going to check, but I haven't got a consultation, or the Highway Authority hasn't got a consultation on any other planning application.
So if you can just clarify that, please.
Yes, sorry, thank you. We found it. It's with another officer, so that would be P/26/02618/full, which is to create creation of a terrace to the east side of Littledown House, erection of an outdoor gym adjacent to the satellite building 1, and installation of outdoor table tennis facilities. That is the only other one that I'm aware of. There is a discharge condition of a biodiversity net gain plan, but that's in relation to a separate application to this. I don't know much about that application. I'm not the case officer, but looking at the description of development, there's nothing there that would have any bearing on parking provision. There's nothing to do with that that's increasing numbers of staff working on site, nothing that would have any highways impact that I can see. I don't know whether you wanted to come in on.
It's first I've seen this application.
I mean, the nature of it, again, notwithstanding that I'm not the case officer, so I haven't spent time exploring this, but on the basis of the description of development, it's improving some existing facilities on site. So when you go back to these MPPF tests, would it be reasonable and proportionate to require a travel plan for the erection of an outdoor gym, installation of table tennis facilities? I would suggest that might be difficult, but again, with the caveat that I'm not the case officer, so I don't have full sight of the application.
It wasn't my application. I just balked at the suggestion that there wasn't another application because there clearly is. So in the paper for this application, in the consultations that were received, there's an objection from public health and there's an objection from environmental health. So in terms of the public health response, they were looking for what they described as a more robust transport plan with clear actions to promote sustainable travel and reduce car dependency, amongst other things, as well as the overspill car parking. And the environmental health were responding in relation to air quality and requiring a submission of an assessment of the air quality and dust impacts of construction. And I'm just not clear to the extent to which those objections are being mitigated by the conditions.
Thank you. The public health objections in relation to the travel plan relate to the proposed condition. So a lot of what they said dovetails directly with the suggestions made by the local highway authority in the event that we're minded to recommend approval, because obviously their position is that they object. So they dovetail very nicely. And in terms of air quality, I'm just trying to find the right condition number here. So there is, in terms of air quality during the construction period, there's condition 8, which is a construction demolition environmental management plan. Bear with me, I'm just going through the conditions. So there's the construction management plan. What was the? Yeah, so that the end of the comments from environmental health said that the construction environmental management plan would be required in terms of air quality, so that forms condition 8. Sorry.
So it's discharged under a condition 8. Yep. Okay, so if there's no further questions,
Sorry, I've got a quick one.
Councillor Pedro?
Just a factual one, probably to Ms Holbrook. How long has the arrangement been in place for the off-site parking? How long standing is it?
Good question. I haven't got the details in front of me. Do you mind if I just have a couple of minutes to have a look? Thank you.
Okay.
I haven't got the date right in front of me, but I do know it is in a document. I'm just trying to find it quickly. I do know it's been a while. It's not a recent arrangement. However, I'm sure the applicant's team would have that answer quicker than I would if you did, if there was no objections to asking them directly.
I've no objection. I'd just like the answer, wherever it comes from, if it's accurate.
Okay, if committee's happy, thank you again.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to give the exact year. We know it's definitely over 5 years. It's on a lease basis. The lease runs out next year. Obviously, there's always an opportunity to extend it, but the lease does due to run out in 2027 on those spaces. We are currently trying to find it out, but obviously I can't guarantee the time. But it is a relatively long-standing, but it's definitely over 5 years. The lease is due to end next year.
Okay, appreciate that. Okay, Councillor Canavan.
Lease from whom?
Yeah, BH Live in effect, who own the Little Down Centre. Okay, so if there's no further questions, I'm sure the debate will come up with some other questions. As we've heard, I think generally, and even the objecting ward councillors are pro the actual building, and we've seen the pictures and the landscaping, existing landscaping. I think the building does settle quite well in the environment, and the impact will be minimal as we've seen. But yeah, the key is the parking, the disruption on the roads, and I think similar to the football club, it sounds as though the company are committed to work with the council and the community and their employees to obviously, like a big multi-global company as they are, they've got environmental standards, sustainability targets they need to reach. So I think it's not a empty promise that they're committing to, and I think we will, as the debate goes on, I'm sure we're strengthen the condition 23 about the travel plan, the timescales, etc., and what we're there. So for debate, then please, Councillor Slade.
I'm not naive to the parking because we have them in my ward. I get the emails. They're returning to increased number of employees. Was there was a sort of a stay of execution, if you like, while the building wasn't there. They're now going to rebuild. Councillor Williams has said his ward do suffer with it, but not significantly. I don't like over conditioning. I'm prepared to listen to a condition where we put I think it was a suggestion of a 6-month timestamp on it. But I don't like lots of other conditions. I think we've got 22 conditions already, and how far do we go with the problem that's already there? And then the applicant they are prepared to work with us. We don't need tighten condition. I think it's at 2023, but I wouldn't be open to tightening too much more. And I'll listen, but I'm prepared to move to say that we grant it, and I'll listen to what others have to say in the debate.
Okay, thank you for the proposal. Do I have a seconder for that, Councillor Gillett?
Yeah, and I think in terms of sort of building it forward. It's looking in terms of what is the bigger picture around there. You know, there's 5,000 on-site workers at the hospital. There's nearly 2,000 in Ageas and the court and Alliance combined, and you don't actually know if the people who are parking down that end are parking there because they're working in a hospital where they have to pay £70 a month to park there if they're an employee. So we don't actually know. Even if you do a traffic survey, you're not actually going to know the split of all of that. And I kind of did a quick kind of figure. They have the right, obviously, to request their staff to return to the office after COVID, and that only gives us like a net additional 186 people if you take into account the increase in the employees and the increase in parking over and above what they had prior to when they had the site, which was the Wiltshire Centre. So I think there's enough there within the content, and what's been put in there already is quite strong.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nanobu.
I just had a comment really before we vote. I would be more concerned if we were being asked to grant planning permission for the office block without parking. So I think the fact that JP Morgan Chase are adding some additional car parking spaces is very responsible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rice.
Yes, this application is interesting given who the applicants are and the nature of having a global influence through their financial investments and their opportunity to provide leadership and particular interest that's always on everybody's mind is how everybody moves around. And I really appreciated the discussion about jobs and the economic benefits of having the company here. And there is a big piece of work to be done about how we enable our community as a whole to be able to move without the use of the private car, given the climate crisis that we're in, that JP Morgan directly influences through its finances. So for me, it's a big picture with some very small detail. And it may seem insignificant, the car parking, but it's all part of a big picture. So in terms of the bigger picture for the area, I think it's important that JP Morgan know, or all large employers know that, for example, workplace parking levies are being looked at by local authorities as a very useful evidence-based way of enabling better active travel and public transport. So it's just something to consider. Obviously, you may well get the planning application today, but you don't necessarily have to build the car parking because you can focus on all of the other things that are in your travel plan. So it was, I personally feel I would have been preferred to have seen this application coming forwards with a lot more investment in active travel and public transport. That's my view. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So any other speakers? Councillor Canavan?
Well, Councillor Slade's made the point about commitment to the community, commitment to the environment. There are quite a lot of objections to this proposal, and I'm not seeing anything in this paperwork that actually responds to those objections, other than conditions and hopes of some plan or other, which nobody will see and nobody will have any influence over. So that's my frustration, that, you know, we're putting a lot of trust and emphasis on bits of paper which we haven't seen.
Okay, thank you. And just on, did you? Councillor Lepedwin?
Yeah, I'm happy to support this application. We've already heard in the report, although I don't think it's been mentioned so far, that the car parking, the current car parking, is currently not at capacity, that there is spare capacity for the current number of employees working on site. So with the additional car parking, with additional employees coming back on site, it ought to come somewhere near, I mean, I haven't done the maths, but it ought to be evening out and not being too much of a problem. I like the fact that there are going to be solar panels on the building as well as the car park. I'm very encouraged to hear that it's going to be a much more rigorous travel plan, including active travel. We've heard the cooperation that's working, certainly with Iford Ward, even if not with Queen's Park. Hopefully Queen's Park can get the same sort of treatment. So on the whole, I'm happy to support it.
Okay, thank you. And just Councillor Slade as the proposer, the part about condition 23 with adding a travel plan within 6 months as a part of the condition, as the officer stated, you're happy to update that condition, and also maybe not the condition, but about the walking distance to consider. That's probably more for the applicant to take in consideration. Before you come in, Councillor Slade, Mr. Waters.
I'm so sorry, just for clarification, the travel plan needs to be submitted to BCP prior to occupation of the building so that the sustainable travel modes and initiatives are in place before all the staff are returning to obviously that building when it's then occupied. I think that's to do with the TROs. So once everyone's back in the building, let's see how actually it's all functioning. So it's prior to occupation for the travel plan to come in, but it's the traffic regulation order review of the controlled parking area once everyone's back into the office and it's operating.
Okay, so what type of wording in the condition? So you suggested wording of that condition 23.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So instead of within 6 months of occupation, the wording would be prior to occupation. So before the office building was used at all, the travel plan would have to have been submitted and agreed. So as Ms Holbrook was saying, the impact, if you like, happens once the office block is occupied. So we need to have all those measures in place before it is occupied. So it's not pre-commencement in terms of they could start the building work, but they can't use it until we have a travel plan that's agreed. So that's what officers are recommending to members.
Okay. And but with regards to obviously the neighbouring ward and the TROs, does that give enough time for the Highways Authority to see the findings of a travel plan and implement a TRO in appropriate wards within a 15 minutes walk?
So we will need to review it once all the staff are back in. I mean, TRO process is not a quick process. I mean, you are looking 9 months to get through a traffic regulation order. So that isn't a quick process. However, we do need to allow for enough time for full occupation so you can see a clear impact on that highway network.
Okay, so I think the condition, Councillor Slade, as is, just amending instead of prior to occupation.
No need to amend it.
Excuse me, the condition that I've got on the addendum is prior to occupation of the developed hereby permitted, an updated travel plan must be submitted to. So that's what we want, surely. That's what we're talking about.
Were we not talking about 6 months prior to?
Yeah, so the travel plan, definitely preoccupation as it is. There's no change there. My question was going to be, it makes no sense to put 6 months post when it's pre. So the travel plan as pre-occupation makes sense. The TRO is whether or not we can have the survey done 6 months or within 6 months. But hearing what you're saying now, maybe 6 months isn't enough time to collate the data, get you guys to review it.
I think 6 months is an okay time frame to go out, the applicant go out, do the surveys once everyone is occupying the building, and then submit the data to us as the Highway Authority. The problem is if it does need an extension to the traffic regulation order for the controlled parking, it won't be in within that 6 months because that is the lengthy period. However, I think 6 months post occupation to then undertake a review, does seem sensible.
So in that case, the travel plan's not changing. That's preoccupation, but the condition being that the applicant complete the survey within 6 months, provide us with the data.
Yeah, that sounds good. And Mr. Gord, if you confirm.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I always like to try and listen to the issues that come up in the debate and the questions that get asked, and helpfully try and summarise. So just to start with Councillor Slade's point, and I'm sure Joss and Peter will jump on me if I've got this wrong. You've got the condition in the addendum which secures the need for the travel plan, which is prior to occupation. Then you have the review mechanism once the staff are back on site, and then that will pave the way potentially to decide whether further mitigation measures need to be introduced, such as TROs. That mechanism for doing that is secured in the Section 106. Is that correct? Yeah. So within the Section 106 group, you'll have the wording which secures that post go live mechanism for review, which potentially then paves the way for TROs, etc. So that combination of condition for the travel plan and Section 106 for the mechanisms that sit behind the review behind that secures all of that. Chair, if I may, just picking up on some of the other points, it's come up several times during the site visit and most recently from Councillor Slade again about what's the difference between the Wiltshire building, which is the old building that was demolished about 5 years ago, and this proposed. You've heard from the applicant and from Pete as the presenting officer that this is primarily about bringing existing staff back onto campus, although it is true to say that there will be a bit extra capacity within the building, and that will be down to JP Morgan to decide if they're going to expand their workforce. So those are facts. So it's primarily to deal with relocating existing staff back onto the campus, but the reality is there will be an element of capacity for them to grow on site. Just turning to Councillor Canavan's point, I think if I've understood him correctly, his point is irrespective of whether there's a net increase of staff by way of growing or not, I think his point is it's a large number of people that are visiting the site on a daily basis, and that therefore there should be some travel plan that is promoting more active, sustainable modes of transport. And obviously, one of the benefits, if members decide to approve this application, is that you will have a travel plan, which obviously Joss and her colleagues in highways, they will be the professionals whose remit it is to actively grow that travel plan in conjunction with the applicant, along reasonable and proportionate lines. But I think, again, I don't want to put words in Councillor Canavan's mouth, but I think his point is the killer point really is, can there be some extra level of involvement from members / the community? Now, my view on that would be, I would ordinarily sort of be a bit cautious about that. I think you've got to put trust in your professional officers to develop that in a professional basis with the applicant. But having said that, we've heard from Councillor Williams in his ward deputation that, and I can't comment on whether this is true or not, Chair, that JP Morgan have a good working relationship, certainly with the ward members. So I'm just wondering whether that could continue to grow, maybe broaden slightly to bring in some of the other ward members that we've heard from this morning in the slightly further afield. And what that looks like, it could be for JP Morgan and the ward members to grow, whether that's a quarterly bulletin newsletter, whether members want to consider a condition to develop a scheme of community engagement. But I think the actual input into the travel plan, my advice would be, you've got professional officers in your highway team, that's their job. I think they should be given the remit to do that. But I do understand Councillor Canavan's point about there being some similar working relationship that keeps members who represent their constituents abreast of what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Gord. Yeah, that was useful to summarise it all. So we've got a proposal on the table, Councillor Slade. You're happy, and Democratic Services, you're happy with the condition?
Chair, as I understand it, we are back to voting on the officer recommendation as updated by the conditions in the addendum.
Yeah. So that's Mr. Gord.
Yeah, so Chair, just I don't know whether there's members want to have a debate about that last point I made about, whether they want a scheme of community engagement to be developed, whether that's secured by a condition, or if not, are you happy for that working relationship that Councillor Williams, as a ward councillor, said is quite good, but to be developed outside of the planning application, shall we say, to bring in the other ward members that you've heard from today?
Thank you, Mr. Gould. Yeah, I think from what Councillor Slade has said, the conditions are appropriate as now, and those arrangements with the ward councillors outside of this application to build those relationships. Okay, so everyone happy with what we're voting on? So if you're in agreement to, Ms.
Yeah, and I think just reiterating what you're saying there, I mean, effectively, or just suggesting as a group that maybe the ward councillors for Queen's Park get invited to the meetings that that Lawrence goes to. Just to.
That's it. Okay, so if you're happy to approve as set out with the councillors, oh, we just jumped with the updates in the addendum sheet, show now.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
If you're against, show now.
1.
And abstentions.
1.
So that application has been approved as set out with the addendums. Thank you. And that is the only point on the agenda, so the meeting is now closed. Thank you.